I'm Roy Wesley. I live in Chicago, Illinois. Um, I was actually born in Portland, Oregon, May 5th, 1942. And that date is significant because it was also the date that the people in the area of Portland where I lived were to be evacuated to the Portland Detention Center during World War II. And the place that they chose in Portland was the Livestock Exhibition Center. Since it was in the spring, there was still a lot of manure on the ground, and they hastily just covered that up with some plywood and built little stalls about roughly 10 by 10 to house the families. So that's where we were destined to go on May 5th, the day I was born. But since my mom was having me, they allowed her 3 days to go to the hospital to have me delivered and then be shipped to the exhibition center. My dad said, I kicked my way to freedom. I didn't want to be born in the incarceration center. So both sides of my family are Japanese in origin. And when my dad started his optometric practice in Portland, his office was right on the border between the white community and the Japanese community. And so he had a lot of Caucasian patients who could not pronounce his name, couldn't spell it. Wesugi, ue meaning over, and sugi meaning cedar trees, which is where the family home was in Wakayama, Japan. And so he even on his letterhead for his office, he had Dr. Newton K. Wesugi, and then underneath that pronounced West, W-E-S dash S-U-G-I, to help patients to identify who he is. But even with that, he realized that people could not find him in the telephone book or even remember how to pronounce the name to keep up the relationships. So that was one thing that happened. And then the other, of course, was World War II coming out and all the prejudice against the Japanese at the time. So combined with those two factors, I think when he got to college in Richmond, Indiana, he decided that he needed to change the family name. And he chose Wesley because that's the name of the founder of the Methodist Church to which his parents belonged. And so he thought, oh, they can't object if I choose the founder, John Wesley's name. Well, they did, because they said, how can you throw out thousands of years of samurai history and do that? Well, he did anyway. But, it shows, I think, the complexity of what it is to be Japanese American at the time. And it was one solution to have him find greater acceptance in a culture that did not respect Japanese Americans at the time. My mom, my brother, and I, we were in the detention center for 6 months. My dad was only with us for 3 months because he was able to obtain a release from the detention center because he was an optometrist who had already gotten his degree, but he applied for further education through the Quaker school system, which was being set up by the Friends at that time. And plus all the letters he got from prominent politicians like the mayor and the governor, that people that he knew from his work in the community. He was also president of the Japanese American Citizen League in Portland, the Portland chapter at the time. So he got to know politicians because at that time, when the Toland Committee was setting up to take testimony whether or not Japanese Americans should be evacuated from the West Coast or not, he was one of the people that was giving testimony to the Toland Committee at the time. My mom, brother, and I had to stay there for the full 6 months before we were shipped out to Minidoka, Idaho, for that incarceration camp. It was a difficult time because the camp setup had nurseries for kids who were like 5 on up, because they would be going to school. And there was some kind of pre-nursery program, but since my brother and I were so young, there was no facility for handling us, so she had to take care of us on her own, and I think that was very difficult, and it was a full-time job taking care of us.
Sure.
And when you think about camp life at the time, when I thought about, well, I'm actually writing about this period of her life now, kind of in a memoir. It's my second book will be coming out, but to describe how she had to take care of me as a small baby, even to take me in to take a bath, which was done in a galvanized tub where you did the laundry in the laundry room. Because you couldn't hold the baby in the shower in case you dropped it because of the soap and everything else.
Sure, yeah.
So they would go to the laundry room, use the galvanized tub for washing the babies. And then there are all the diapers. A lot of diapers to be washed and cleaned and, hopefully dried. Especially when it came to be winter, that was a very, very difficult job. Well, the first book is just published this year in July of 2021, and it's called Invisible Vision, and it's the story of my dad, Dr. Newton K. Wesley, who was a pioneer in the development of contact lenses in the United States in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. His partner, George Jessen, would tell people who said that your partner is a Jap, isn't he? And he would say, oh, no, don't worry about that. He's Korean. There's this little cover-up.
Wow, interesting. And then your second book that you're sort of contemplating or in the process
of writing
yeah,
is really about my mom. And it's about her story going through the camp and, what happened to her. I think it's in a way it's a tragedy because all of the conditions that she had to endure, incarcerated for two and a half years with two young children, two babies, led to a lot of loneliness and depression. And I think it actually contributed to an early death. She died at 56 of cancer. There is this hidden side to her story, which is what I want to reveal in the book. All of the hurts and things that people could never talk about. She had this strong inner force that let her persevere, that gave her the resilience to get through all of that. But there's a payback because, yes, even though you cover all of that up, there's something gnawing away at your innards that never was expressed. And it causes the kinds of diseases, I think, and the mental problems that people experience because of not being able to really be fully self-expressed. So my job, hopefully, is to give expression to that inside thing that never got out. And I wish I could have done that with my grandparents because their story, which is unknown, being the first generation, who lost everything during the incarceration period. The trauma of, like, for example, my dad's father losing 5 hotels that he had in Portland because of the war.
Wow.
Everything that he had worked up to, 40 years of labor, going from the railroads to lumber camps to the salmon fisheries, that whole experience to develop enough money to be able to have these hotels. And they're not like glamorous hotels. You're talking about hotels that serve the poorest of the poor. They're single room only type lodgings. And sometimes he let people stay for free because they were so down and out. He was down and out, but they were worse than he was. So, that kind of spirit that gave to the community, and then have that all taken away. And then told, go back and start all over again, as if that were really possible. I went to a grammar school that was 90% Jewish and almost all white. I thought I was Jewish for a long time.
I was going to say.
And by the time I was 13, I wanted to be bar mitzvahed, it is true that I think I grew up because of lack of having a Japanese community around me.
Yeah.
I felt that I was white. I was the true banana, uh,
I see.
yellow on the outside and white on the inside.
Uh,
But uh, and that's actually a kind of a very strange way to live your life. I don't think I knew I was really Japanese, that I looked different than my friends until, because even our mirror at home, I can remember being just about the height of the sink, and the mirror was way above the sink, so I never saw myself in the mirror until I got to be 8, 9, when I could actually see. Uh, and I do remember being kind of, wow, shocked. That's me. It's not the image I had. But,
Sure.
there were other incidences when I was younger, like I think when we first came to Chicago and we went to Polk Brothers, my mom wanted to buy a new toaster or something for the kitchen. And so we had to take 2 or 3 buses to get to the store. And I remember holding her hand and coming into the store, walking across, and she asked the first salesman in a white shirt and black tie, big fellow, huge white man, who said, "Go back to where you came from." And my mom was kind of shocked, and she just turned around. I looked up at her, and her face was all flushed red. And we just marched right out of the store. She never spoke about it.
Wow.
But I do remember the incident. And it wasn't until years later that I put it together. Or, in school, I do remember being taunted by the neighborhood hoodlums, the guys who wore their blue jeans, down.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
this is even before the current trends, but, and they would taunt me by saying, "Ching Chong Chinaman, Ching Chong Chinaman," in the sing-songy
Yes,
way.
sure.
And I thought, you stupid people, I'm not Chinese. It's like I knew ethnically who I was. And I think about my first associations, the kind of who would I like to be. It was, I wanted to be Superman in those cute little blue tights with the shorts, and or a wrestler, who were half naked, and I was always interested in the bulge. But
And did it occur to you that not everybody was like that? That was like not the way it was for other boys?
I did realize that. And I also realized that it's something you keep to yourself, you don't talk about. So about that time, my brother said to me, "Don't you get a funny feeling, tingly feeling when you see naked girls?" I said, "What? No." I mean, I said that to myself. But I also knew that I couldn't reveal that that's not the case with me. And I don't know where that comes from. Culturally, it's just like in the air. It's also very Japanese, that Japanese don't express what's really inside. You just cover up, and life
Was
goes on.
that message explicitly given to you, or was that just by example you sort of picked up that that's the way you behave?
It's definitely by example, and
Okay.
it's
So your mother and father were not very emotionally expressive people?
never.
Never?
Well,
Even with each other?
yeah, rarely. Rarely. They tried to be more emotional compared to their upbringing. My parents were, yes, devoted to each other, but on the one hand, my dad was, because he was so busy building up a company and traveling internationally, he was not home very much. And given my mother's background and what she had to go through during the incarceration period, she was very lonely. She really wanted to have that ideal Leave It to Beaver family where the dad came home for dinner every night and,
Sure.
interacted with the family, and especially with her. And that did not happen. So in the late 50s, during the Korean War, there was a young man who just came back from the Navy, and his mother was a good friend of my mom, and they would come down to our house, and he would hang around a lot. And he was only 22. My mom was in her 40s at that time. And they began a relationship. And I became very attached to him because he was handsome. He had that Navy crew cut, blonde, blue-eyed, muscular. And he would take me to the beach to go swimming. And it was the first time that I ever saw a naked man. And that formed my opinion, and my previous proclivity for looking at tight shorts on men was fully realized here in the physical appearance of this Adonis, which set my model, I guess, for what a male companion would look like. And actually, my husband fits that Adonis model. So I was, smitten from early on. It's not the typical, story, I guess, but I grew up having that image of being married to a woman.
Certainly.
And I wanted to be a good boy. I mean, I had to be the kid who would get married, have kids, and I did. I wasn't totally repressed. I mean, I think I never had gone to gay bars or anything until much later in life, but having gone to a gay bar where there's this thrill of excitement because of something unknown, of dangerous.
Yeah.
You don't know what to expect.
Yeah, because it's forbidden, right?
It's forbidden, exactly. It's the forbidden fruit. And I didn't have that early, but I did have that in my early relationships with other men. And it was thrilling when I found that I could have sex with somebody, a male.
Was that in your 30s?
No, it was actually later in my 20s, yeah.
Okay.
Before I was even actually admitting to myself that this aberration, which is what I thought it was.
I see.
And then I would end up, after that happened, pray that I would be cured. It never happened.
Even with the last name Wesley, it didn't happen.
No. Well, and thank God it didn't happen. I mean, even though I prayed to God to have it happen. But
did your wife know?
Yes, I told her before we got married.
Oh, you did?
And she said, "Don't worry, you'll change."
Ah, wow. Okay. Which was the prevalent sort of state of mind about those things back then. Right. Did you know any other gay people before you got married?
Not openly, no.
Okay.
And even the men that I would have sex with were never considered gay.
Oh.
I mean, I don't think they would ever say they were. One relationship which was extraordinarily intense, and my first real love of that sort, young Columbia University college student who then went on to Oxford, and we had a relationship for about 1.5 years. And when he went to Oxford and then to study in France, we would write these hot, passionate letters, and then he came back to the States and said, he had fallen in love with his medical student roommate. So it was at that point that I realized this is impossible. You cannot have a relationship with a man. It'll never work out. And that's just after that I got married. I lived in New York for 10 years. That's where I actually met my wife at that time, because she was a graduate student in botany.
Oh, Was your wife Nihonjin?
No, she was actually Chinese. Her family was from
okay.
Chongqing, China originally, but then
Okay.
emigrated to Taiwan. Well, they were very young when I divorced and met Mark. My younger son was only 8 at the time, and the older one was 12, 13. And I think it was very difficult for them to understand. But we have grown closer as a result of that over the years. I stayed with the family. We had dinners together every night. I would come back to the house and be with them.
How did you introduce Mark into the picture?
Well, he was just hanging around all the time.
I see, there you go.
And then
And did they ever ask you who he was? Or did they just think he was a friend of yours? Or
yeah, friend, I guess. Well, no, more than that. They knew. As you know, and as probably most gay people know, it's a long evolution and personal journey for everybody. And in my case, in my 20s, as I said, when I began to explore outside the norm sexually, it was a very difficult period because I remember being on the shores of Lake Michigan on the Michigan side, feeling so depressed and lonely and suicidal that it's amazing that I got through that period without therapy. I mean, later I did go through a lot of therapy, particularly when I was married and trying to make a decision. And it all centered around sexuality. And I thought the therapist I had, because he was gay at one point but married with children, I thought that he would open up the door, and I even went to my priest at the time for advice, and he gave me exactly the wrong advice. He said, no, you have to stay within your marriage. Okay, come on. Because the reason that it was hypocritical to me, because he was a gay priest living with another gay priest. And so for him to tell me that was not the answer I wanted to hear.
Sure.
And so I just discounted that. I mean, that didn't make any sense whatsoever. And therapy was mildly helpful, but not totally. There were just too many hypocritical statements coming out. And I don't think that when I was going through this, there was as much clarity of understanding of what it means to be gay and who you are, that it is perfectly normal and acceptable. And to get to that point in your life, to be able to say that, that's when the final freedom comes. Oh my God. Well, I guess it's like a slow dawning where the light finally comes in and you just let go of all of the repression and the hidden fears and just express who you are. And I think a lot of it had to do when I joined Lambda Legal and fought for the causes that we all benefit from now, because it was in the opening up legally, which began to make you feel free, because the repression from the society was lifting. Just a couple weeks ago, when J.J. Unton at the Japanese American Service Committee put together that panel where I was one of 6 people discussing these issues with a Japanese American group of people. And oh my God, the comfort that came from that was just like you went into your bathtub of warm water with soapy suds and everything was beautiful, and you were just surrounded by love and the peace and recognition that you have, like Okari, you are home. You've come home to something that you never knew could have possibly have existed before. There's this loneliness of being gay, and then there's the loneliness of being an Asian person. Normally they don't come together. I am really very grateful for the opportunity for this point in my life to be 79 years old and feeling like a newborn baby because of this experience.
Sure. Yeah, discovering new things.
Yeah,
absolutely. So I want to ask you something. I mean, I know you're 79 years old, and I know that, you were raised in a Japanese American household, and yet you have a kind of passion and an emotional expressiveness that may not be as typical for a Japanese American male of your vintage, as it were. Have you always been that way? There's a kind of emotional awareness that you have that I find really compelling, and really unusual, because you're also able to talk about it. And a lot of the Japanese American males I know, even who are my age, which would be around 10 years younger than you, don't have that expressiveness. Is that something you've always had?
No, I guess not. I think it comes from raising my kids. When my boys were born, I said to myself, I'm not going to raise them the way I was raised.
Wow, okay.
And it gave me this new freedom to explore what it means to raise children. And while I'm raising them, to experience a childhood I never had.
Wow.
So that's another revelation and opening in my life that wouldn't have occurred if I weren't the peculiar person that I am, who felt like he had to get married, did, and had kids. I am just so grateful for that experience that other people haven't had. And I think it's also why gay and lesbian and transgender people want to have children of their own. Because out of this exploration of what it is to give back, you gain so much more. It may not seem that way when they're, you have all these needs to take care of. Physical, financial, emotional,
sure.
All of that.
Right, yeah.
But in the long run, it's all worth it. Oh my God, what would I do without him? He's my life and inspiration. Yeah, we've been together 31 years, and I am so grateful for him being in my life. Every day is a joy. His constant encouragement and support, he's always been there for me, and I hope I am there for him as well. We just have such a strong mutual respect and love and a commitment to each other. We're both very lucky to have each other, to have found each other, to be able to live our lives together. Don't give up. I wished I had somebody at that age to tell me that. And I guess the words themselves ring hollow when you're feeling really depressed and lonely. So there's more substance behind what you mean by don't give up. But from the perspective of the future, there is so much available, but you don't know that when you're 20. How do you meaningfully say that there is going to be openings beyond your belief and have it sink in? And maybe it is just in the unfolding of the story itself that somebody can see, oh, that's what I'm going to become. Life is always an opening.